It had been years since I'd spoken to my family, 7 to be exact. So when I opened the mail and found a wedding invitation from my younger sister, Lauren, it felt like a punch to the gut. Lauren, the family favorite. Lauren, the perfect one. Lauren, the one who'd always been the shining star in my dad and stepmom's universe. I hadn't even heard from her in all this time, and suddenly, she was inviting me to her big day. The audacity was almost laughable. But then there was the note. Tucked neatly inside the pristine envelope, in Lauren's unmistakable handwriting, she'd written that she missed me, that she wanted to make things right. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at those words, trying to figure out if this was genuine or just another manipulation cooked up by my stepmom, Deborah. After everything they'd put me through, why now? Why this? To explain why this note hit so hard, I need to rewind. My mom died when I was 16 and Lauren was 13. It devastated us both in ways I can't even put into words. But while I was struggling to cope with the loss, Dad was out moving on. By the following year, he'd married Deborah, the woman who quickly turned our lives into a nightmare. From the moment she moved in, she made it her mission to erase every trace of my mom. Photos disappeared. Mom's favorite decor vanished overnight. It was like she never existed. Lauren, on the other hand, clung to Deborah like she was a lifeline. She was young and needed someone, and Deborah swooped in to play the savior. I didn't begrudge Lauren for it. I couldn't. But I couldn't stand Deborah, and I hated the way Dad let her take over without question. As the years passed, the divide only grew. By the time I went to college, Dad had refused to help me with tuition, saying I needed to learn responsibility. Meanwhile, Lauren got everything handed to her on a silver platter: tuition, a brand new apartment, even a car. All courtesy of Dad and Deborah. I was working 3 part-time jobs, scraping by to make it through school, and trying to build my event planning business from the ground up. And every time I called home, Deborah made sure to belittle my efforts, calling it a cute little hobby. Lauren, of course, was excelling in school and basking in their adoration. Story 2. The headline of this tale is, Ex-wife demands money for my life-saving cancer treatment so she can buy a sports car for her new stepson. She regretted dragging me to court when I declined. Hello everyone. Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Hello everyone. I never imagined that I would be sharing this much about my life here, but I really need to get everything off my chest. I, a 34-year-old man, believed I had my life together not too long ago. Just a good middle-class arrangement, nothing spectacular. I had a little home, a reliable career, and a family that I believed would always be there for me. I was mistaken, it turns out. Ashley and I were wed for over a decade. She seemed like the entire deal when we first met. She was intelligent, humorous, and aware of her goals in life. I couldn't help but be drawn to her confidence. After a few years, we were married, purchased a modest home in a peaceful area, and planned to have a family. We had our daughter Lily a few years later. To be honest, she is the finest thing that has ever happened to me. She is currently 6 years old. The one thing I know I've done well is being her father. Despite our imperfections, I felt that Ashley and I were doing well together. She may occasionally be demanding, but who isn't? I assumed that was simply the typical things of married life. Then, around a year ago, I began to feel strange. I was constantly exhausted, as if I couldn't get rid of this ongoing fatigue. I initially put the blame on employment. After working long hours to earn money for Lily's future, I began to lose weight and experience strange ailments. In the end, I went to the doctor and was diagnosed with large cell carcinoma. Everything seemed to freeze when I heard that word. After then, I can hardly recall the doctor's words. Something about the survival statistics of therapy and how difficult it would be. I was numb as I sat there. Ashley was with me, and I believed she would support me throughout this difficult time. After all, Isn't that the purpose of marriage? Sticking together throughout difficult times. I had that thought. She first appeared to be helpful. She made all the correct statements. We'll overcome this. You have strength, blah, blah, blah. In retrospect, though, I believe she was only following the routine. She began spending more time outside the house and ceased inquiring about my appointments. Perhaps she was simply anxious, I reasoned. Who wouldn't be after all? In the hopes that she might change her mind, I attempted to give her some space. She didn't. She sat me down one evening and told me, "I can't do this." As simple as that. She said that living with a sick husband wasn't for her. She desired a healthy someone who could continue to support her and Lily. I was at a loss for words. I sat there in a state of shock. She was at ease. She seemed too composed, as if she had practiced it beforehand. Then she simply opened up. She wanted a divorce. She disappeared in a matter of weeks. She left me with the house and the debts after taking Lily and draining our savings account. The divorce procedure was harsh. The big-shot lawyer she hired wiped the floor with me. In the end, I lost nearly everything. Our joint accounts, savings, and even the $200 monthly child support payment. Since Lily is my entire life, and I would stop at nothing to help her, I didn't contest the child support. It still seemed like a stomach hit, though. Thus, I found myself sitting in a vacant home, attempting to balance paying child support, managing cancer treatments, and keeping the lights on. Ashley was unconcerned. She had gone off to live her new life as if I had never been there. The worst aspect is that she made no effort to conceal her motivations. "I need a fresh start," she told me bluntly. "This can't hold me down," as if I were a few damaged items she needed to discard. In retrospect, I see that there were red flags. Ashley had a knack for making everything about herself. She would gripe about taking the slack if I was ill with a cold. She would complain that I wasn't around enough if I worked late, but I dismissed it because I loved her. I assumed that was simply her nature. I also didn't want it to be a huge issue. Following her departure, I found myself unable to decide what to do next. I needed to begin my cancer therapy. I had a lot of bills to pay and had no idea how I was going to manage anything. My entire universe seemed to have been upended. However, I was certain that I would not be defeated easily by Ashley or disease. That was the beginning of it all. Following the divorce, the first few weeks were difficult. Bills began to accumulate. Utilities, medical costs, and mortgage payments. The co-pays for chemotherapy and other treatments quickly mounted up, even though my health insurance wasn't bad. In addition, I still owed Ashley child support each month, which amounted to almost my whole salary, after all else. I made an effort to ignore the fact that she had stolen all of our money and left me with this place. Shortly after the divorce was finalized, I began therapy. Chemotherapy is serious business, I assure you. This was a whole different level of fatigue than I had previously imagined I was experiencing. I would scarcely have the energy to move after collapsing on the couch after returning home from the hospital. On other days, it felt like a marathon just to get out of bed and make a cup of tea. But I had no other option, so I continued to press through. I was battling for more than myself. I was struggling to support Lily. In contrast, Ashley was having the time of her life. Not surprisingly, she remarried within a few months. When things were difficult, she had always been the kind to move on fast. According to what I've heard, she wasn't in a rush to find employment or make a financial contribution because her new spouse was rich. Occasionally, she would contact me about Lily, primarily to request additional funds for necessities like school supplies or new clothes. She was radio quiet, but for that. I first made an effort to be polite. I hoped Ashley would ultimately see how harsh she had been, and I didn't want to make things more difficult for Lily. However, she didn't. She would always shut me down when I attempted to discuss with her how we might share the expenses for Lily's needs, or even give me a respite because I was practically battling for my life. "Her father is you. It's your duty," she would say. As if she hadn't simply taken everything and abandoned me. I didn't want to share the situation with anyone. To be honest, I felt ashamed. I thought I had failed, as a father as well as a husband. However, my coworker Emma sensed something was wrong one day when I was sitting at work, looking at my mounting mountain of medical bills. She sat down next to me and inquired about my well-being. Since I ended up spilling everything, I suppose I must have appeared really harsh. Everything. The financial catastrophe, the divorce, the disease. When I finished, Emma listened without interjecting and stated, "We're going to figure this out. This is not unique to you." Emma and a couple of my other coworkers surprised me with a suggestion a few days later, but I didn't give it much thought at the moment. To assist pay for my medical bills, they planned to establish a neighborhood fundraising. I was apprehensive at first. I was unsure of how others would respond and didn't want to come out as a helpless person. However, they persisted, and to be honest, I had no better idea, so I gave them a pass. To raise money, they began by holding yard and bake sales. After that, someone recommended creating a GoFundMe page. The campaign began to acquire momentum in a matter of days. On social media, people I hardly knew were spreading my story and making donations. My colleagues didn't hold back when they published updates on my fight with cancer. They discussed how much I needed the community's support and how I was trying to be strong for my baby. In the finest manner possible, it was overpowering. I can still recall the day we reached $10,000. For the first time in months, I simply sobbed while sitting in my living room. I felt as though I could breathe once again. Donations continued to pour in, and we had raised $30,000 before I realized it. I was able to concentrate on my therapy without having to worry about how I was going to pay for it, and it was more than I could have ever imagined. To express my gratitude to all of the donors, I uploaded a video to the GoFundMe website. I made an effort to remain composed, but I was so overcome with emotion that I could hardly speak. For me, the support was crucial. The money wasn't the only factor. It was being aware that others were concerned. Ashley obviously didn't, though. Ashley naturally learned about the fundraising. She remained silent at first, but I could sense the storm building. She wouldn't be silent for long, and I should have known that. Things were beginning to improve. However, Ashley, a question mark. She had no intention of allowing me to enjoy that peaceful moment. Naturally, Ashley had to interrupt and spoil the occasion. It began with a random text at first. Since I hadn't heard from her in weeks, aside from the customary reminders about child support, of course, I recall it clearly. It was different this time. "Hey, I saw your fundraiser," she wrote. "Well done on your successful fundraising efforts. Can we have a conversation?" I spent some time looking at my phone, trying to understand what she was saying. Can we have a conversation? It wasn't going to be a cordial conversation because of Ashley. In the hopes that she would overlook it, I chose to ignore it. She phoned the following day. She left a voicemail in her typical arrogant tone since I didn't answer. "We need to talk about how you plan to distribute some of that GoFundMe money," she said. "Given that our daughter might also benefit from some of it, it is only fair." It seemed unbelievable to me. Tell her, after she left me high and dry after draining our savings. It was one of the most annoying conversations I've ever had when I called her back. She made no attempt to sugarcoat it. "Her new stepson?" she asked. It was only fair to use some of the money I had raised for him because she had remarried very quickly and had been wanting a sports car. I was astounded. Trying not to panic, I said, "This money is for my cancer treatment, Ashley. I literally can't afford to stay alive without it." She answers, "I take it you're still alive. You can spare some money for the children if you can afford the chemotherapy." The children? She truly liked her new stepson, who I've never even met, into the same category as Lily. I told her no flat-out number. That money wasn't hers to touch. She didn't take it well. She called me selfish, accused me of using my disease as a sympathy card, and then hung up on me. Ashley has never been the sort to back down when she wants something. Over the following 3 weeks, she besieged me with calls and texts. She claimed I owed her for all the years she spent putting up with me, and that it was only reasonable to give back now that I had additional money. It was absurd when I continued ignoring her. She increased the ante. One morning I opened my front door and discovered a legal notification waiting for me. Ashley was suing me, saying I'd concealed assets throughout the divorce, specifically the GoFundMe money, and that I was in contempt of our arrangement. She demanded half of it, even though the fundraising came after the divorce was official. I felt sick, like truly queasy. Wasn't it enough that I was battling cancer and barely making ends meet? I now had to put up with this bullshit as well. I informed my lawyer, who had assisted me during the divorce, of the situation over the phone. In fact, he laughed. "She's gone crazy." "She doesn't have a case," he replied. Despite the absurdity of her allegations, I was nevertheless anxious. I was uneasy at the prospect of appearing in court again. I was already under a lot of mental and physical strain. Chemo was causing my hair to fall out. I was always tired. I now had to defend myself against Ashley's absurd lawsuit. However, I wasn't going to allow her to intimidate me into giving in to her demands. Not now. I began getting ready for the hearing with my lawyer. We collected as much proof as we could. Documents from the GoFundMe page and medical bills. Evidence that months after the divorce was completed, the benefit took place. Some of the contributors who knew me personally even gave us statements. Ashley continued to attempt to mobilize support in the meantime. She also brought her parents and new husband into it, accusing me of hoarding money when she was having a hard time supporting Lily. It was absurd. In our neighborhood, everyone was aware of the reality. They were aware of my struggle for survival, since they had seen the fundraising and read the updates. Ashley made an effort, even if her sob tale didn't have much merit. The problem is that Ashley didn't realize how much support I had from the community. My name was really recognized from the GoFundMe by the judge assigned to our case. As it happens, he recalled my tale and made an anonymous donation. On the day of the hearing, that small fact turned out to be crucial. I sat at the defendant's table, feeling anxious. Ashley and her new husband looked like they had just walked out of a magazine when they waltzed in. I was already expecting the worst because her lawyer was the epitome of haughtiness. Ashley's attorney opened the hearing by accusing me of lying about my financial situation throughout the divorce. "My client has cause to suspect the defendant hid substantial assets during their divorce processes, Your Honor," he stated. "Resources they may have utilized to help their child and, consequently, the family." Then, with what I'm sure he believed to be an empathetic grin, he pointed to Ashley. "This woman is only attempting to support her child." When the court asked for details, my lawyer didn't even bat an eyelid. Ashley's attorney redoubled, bringing up the GoFundMe page. He said that the fundraising was proof of premeditation. "It is evident that the defendant foresaw this financial windfall and concealed it to prevent equitable distribution during the settlement." The judge had a doubtful expression. "You're saying that he intended to have cancer in order to receive funds for therapy." His tone was neutral as he inquired, but his face was everything but. An uneasy quiet fell. Ashley's attorney tripped when he spoke. The judge interrupted him, "But not quite, Your Honor. Let's go on. What evidence do you have that these money were assets that were hidden?" Ashley herself, however, suddenly got in. Obviously irritated. Lily is being used by him to get compassion. She lost her temper. In the fundraiser, he made reference to her. This implies that the funds are for the family as a whole, not just him. The judge raised his eyebrows. "You're implying that he started receiving donations intended especially to pay for cancer treatments? Should your kid be regarded as marital property when your ex-husband brought her up?" Ashley gave a nod. She crossed her arms as if she were certain she had just presented the best case. She mentioned the sports vehicle at that point. "It's not just about me," she continued. "To be honest, my stepson is also deserving." For years, he had dreamed of owning a sports automobile. After a brief period of silence, the tension was broken by a muffled laugh. In fact, there was a snort from someone in the rear of the courtroom, and I couldn't hold them responsible. Let me explain. "Are you recommending that funds intended to pay for life-saving medical care be diverted to buy a fancy car for your new spouse's child?" the judge said. Ashley stumbled, obviously taken by surprise. Just saying. Family comes first. Additionally, he has been receiving a lot of sympathy. It's unfair." Still composed, my attorney turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we've been dealing with exactly this kind of exploitative and frivolous behavior," he added. "The time frame and the gift records, among other pieces of evidence, demonstrate that this money was raised following the divorce. And only for the sake of my client's existence. Not only is it unfounded, but it is also disrespectful to all those who made sincere donations." The court was clearly not impressed with Ashley's case by the time my lawyer was done. He went to her attorney. "Do you have any hard proof to back up these assertions? Or are we finished?" They had nothing further to say. The day of the verdict eventually arrived after weeks of anxiety. Chemo had been beating my ass the night before, and I hardly slept. In addition, I was mentally reliving every scenario that could have happened. What if Ashley's rubbish was truly believed by the judge? What would happen if I lost the money that enabled me to survive? I was on fumes by the time I arrived at the courts. Ashley, however, entered as though she owned the space. She kept giving me these smug little looks as if she already knew she had won, and she was wearing her new husband's clothes. Sincerely, I wasn't in the mood to put up with her antics, so I avoided making eye contact. However, my lawyer remained composed. "She doesn't have a leg to stand on," he assured them. The judge didn't take long to begin. He summarized what had happened. Ashley claimed that the GoFundMe donations were hidden assets from the divorce and was suing me for half of them. The timeline didn't add up, as my lawyer quickly pointed out. Months before the fundraiser began, the divorce was finalized. He read some of the comments left by donors who specifically stated that the funds were for my treatment, and he showed the GoFundMe page with timestamps. Ashley's attorney attempted to argue that because the donations were based on my sob story, which she said included our daughter, they should still be considered shared assets. They said Ashley had a right to a cut because Lily was involved in my story. Despite the absurdity of the argument, they gave it their all. The judge then raised his voice. He claimed that gifts given expressly for cancer treatment ought to be regarded as marital property. Are you correct? Due to the defendant's reference to his daughter, you could tell he wasn't buying it, even though his tone was calm. Naturally, Ashley was powerless to stop herself. "He's using Lily to get sympathy," she stepped in. "He ought to support his family rather than hoarding money for himself if he has so much of it." My blood was boiling, but I didn't say anything. It was handled flawlessly by my lawyer. Calmly, he described how every bit of the donations had been used or would be used to pay for prescription drugs, medical bills, and other treatment-related costs. He even provided a summary of my insurance coverage, highlighting the significant gaps that I still needed to cover myself. After reviewing the documents, the judge turned back to Ashley. "Have you any evidence?" He questioned whether these cash were collected illegally or covertly during the marriage. She began by talking passionately about how difficult life had been for her after the divorce. She discussed raising Lily by herself, which was absurd, given that she had embezzled the majority of our savings and remarried a wealthy man, and how her stepson had been lusting for a sports vehicle for years. "It's not just about me," she added. "The children are the focus." The judge's face was one of utter incredulity. "Are you really saying that your stepson's need for a sports car is more important than the defendant's need for life-saving medical care?" he said. Ashley muttered something about family priorities in an attempt to retract, but the harm had already been done. The judge was not amenable to it. He inquired of her attorney whether they had any hard proof to back up their assertions, but they did not. It was then my turn to talk. I was requested by the court to describe the origins of the fundraising and the purpose of the funds. I spoke to him about my friends, my co-workers, and how the community had pulled together to support me throughout my worst moments. I described how I was able to pay child support and afford chemotherapy because of the donations, which had actually saved my life. Despite my best efforts, I could feel my voice faltering. As I concluded, there was silence across the courtroom. The judge seemed somewhat moved as well. "I appreciate you sharing," he remarked. "It is obvious that these money were donated for a specific purpose and in good faith." I was holding my breath till the decision was made. It wasn't drawn out by the judge. Ashley could not bring up the same foolishness again, because he rejected her motion with prejudice. He claimed that Ashley had no right whatsoever to the GoFundMe funds, which had been contributed expressly for my medical care, and that they were not marital property. That wasn't all, though. Citing Ashley's baseless and opportunistic attempt to collect money meant for life-saving care, the judge went one step further and ordered Ashley to pay my legal expenses. In recognition of my financial hardship and ill condition, he also decreased my child support payments. Ashley's cheeks flushed when he revealed the lower amounts. "That's unfair," she yelled. "His daughter is being raised by me." The judge remained composed and informed her that my income was now severely constrained and that she had seized most of our funds in the divorce. It was amazing, and he wasn't buying her act. I felt as though a burden had been removed off my shoulders by the time the hearing concluded. Ashley dragged her spouse with her as she raced out of the courtroom. He appeared more ashamed than anything else, as though he was shocked to have married such a conceited person. For me, that day marked a sea change. Donations were secure. Ashley's absurd assertions had been refuted, and the child support was under control. As we walked out of the courthouse, my attorney gave me a pat on the back. He responded, "You deserve that win." And for once, I genuinely think you'd hope Ashley would accept responsibility and move on after being knocked down so severely in court. But no, she doesn't work that way. One thing I've discovered about her over the years is that, even when she's completely mistaken, she doesn't know how to give up. She blew up my phone to start it. I received voicemails, messages, and more. It was the same old crap at first. "You're self-centered. Lily's life is being ruined by you. It's unbelievable that you would prioritize yourself before your own family." To be honest, I was tired of wasting my energy on her, so I chose to ignore her. No sense. Then she began to distort the story. She threw herself into public relations, accusing me of hoarding money and failing to assist our kid. She cleverly omitted the fact that the money was only for my medical expenditures and that the judge had decided in my favor. According to rumors, she had been telling her new husband's family that I was a bad guy who couldn't even make his child support payments on time. Everyone saw right through her, which was comical. Word gets out quickly in our little community. People were aware of the fundraiser and its purpose. They were also aware of the court case. Most people only saw Ashley despite her attempts to elicit pity. For what purpose? She was entitled and avaricious. She didn't stop there, though. Oh no. She began attempting to control Lily. Let me say this now. Keeping Lily out of the turmoil has always been my goal. She is just 6 years old, and she has no right to be subjected to her mother's foolishness. Ashley, though, didn't appear to mind. She began telling Lily things like, "Daddy only cares about his money and doesn't want to help us anymore." Lily began questioning me during our visits, so I am aware of this. For example, "Do you no longer wish to assist Mommy and me?" I was devastated to hear that. As best I could, I sat her down and told her that I was doing all in my power to look after her. Despite the fact that Mommy and Daddy no longer live together, I assured her that we both adore her. Even though it was tempting, I refrained from disparaging Ashley because I didn't want to confuse Lily or lead her to feel conflicted about us. But the way Ashley was taking advantage of her devastated me. At this point, I began to see hints that Ashley's idyllic new life wasn't as flawless as she wanted others to believe. The wealthy man she married immediately following the divorce was her new spouse. He wasn't as loaded as she said, it turns out. I heard that he was having financial difficulties and that his business wasn't performing well. Ashley's requests for additional money began to make much more sense all of a sudden. At one point, she even sent me a lengthy, meandering email in which she said she would forgive me if I would think twice about giving her a portion of the proceeds from the fundraiser. She included every guilt trip known to man. A stable home is what Lily deserves. I can't tell you how difficult it is to raise a child by myself. Furthermore, I only requested the car because I believe my stepson should have a nice life as well. I didn't answer. What might be said? However, I was recuperating at home one afternoon following a particularly difficult chemotherapy session when I heard someone knock on my door. I dragged myself to the door, not expecting anyone. "Who is that standing there, by the way, Ashley?" She appeared irritated, as if I were the one bothering her. She began complaining about how unfair everything was before I could even say hello. "I'm stuck trying to make ends meet, but you have this house and all this money from the fundraiser," she said. "How could you be so callous?" I was utterly dumbfounded as I looked at her. "Heartless," I said. "When I was at my lowest, you abandoned me, took everything we owned, and you're pointing the finger at me now because your new life isn't going as planned." That didn't sit well with her. She began to rant at me, accusing me of being a horrible role model for Lily. and of not being a decent co-parent. I made an effort to remain composed, but the strain of everything, the disease, the legal matter, and the ongoing harassment, took its toll. Ashley. I looked her in the eye as I spoke. I'm surviving on this money. I'm striving to remain here so that I may be Lily's father, and you're standing here insisting that I give you a sports vehicle in exchange. Do you even hear that for yourself? Take a moment to silence her. She then rushed off after muttering something about how she was done with me. For the first time, I genuinely felt sad for her as I saw her get into her car and go. Not that she was deserving of pity. She didn't, but it was obvious that she would never be content. She would never have enough money or possessions, and that's the current situation. I'm doing my hardest to stand my ground, even though I realize I have a lot on my plate right now. I'll be sure to notify you all if anything new happens. The last update. Hello everyone. I have enjoyed reading all of your comments over the last several days, and I am very grateful for your kindness and encouragement. It has great significance. The long-awaited update is now here. It's better late than never. I thus half anticipated Ashley to play another prank following her little doorbell incident. However, I was shocked when she eventually retreated. Perhaps she recognized she was making no progress, or perhaps her new life was too chaotic for her to continue to worry me. In any case, the quiet was priceless. I was at last able to concentrate on what really mattered and on myself. Completing my treatments and being present. A significant portion of Lily's medical bills were paid for by the GoFundMe donations, which relieved me of a significant burden. Without that money, I would have been buried between the extra expenses that insurance didn't cover and the chemo meds. I always remembered the folks who supported me as I sat on the chemotherapy chair. My neighbors, friends, co-workers, and even complete strangers who shared my story or sent money. Even though it seemed like I was battling alone at times, it served as a reminder that I wasn't. My main source of inspiration to keep going is Lily. Although she doesn't completely comprehend what transpired, she is aware that her father is ill and frequently visits the doctor. Despite my lack of energy, I make sure our trips are memorable. Ashley, on the other hand, finds it difficult to pay the court-mandated legal expenses. I suppose it's karma. She attempted to sue me in the hopes of receiving a paycheck, but instead she was left with additional debt. The icing on the cake. She was severely impacted by the child support cut. She had become so accustomed to receiving that consistent $100–200 a month that it had been drastically reduced. Her belt has to be tightened. I'd be lying if I said it didn't give me a small sense of satisfaction. Small-town rumors began to circulate about the entire court scandal. People were shocked when Ashley attempted to use the money from my cancer fundraising to purchase a sports automobile. I overheard some others calling her Sports Car Ashley in jest. I won't lie, but I didn't spread it, nor did I correct anyone. She now has to face with the fact that she dug her own grave. I didn't have the energy to harbor resentment, as much as I would have liked to celebrate the win. It's as if cancer puts things in perspective. I don't want to waste time worrying about Ashley and her decisions since I am too busy trying to live and support Lily. So much had already been stolen from me by her. I will not give her any more room to think. My therapies have been beginning to show benefits lately. It's not simple. Chemotherapy is cruel, and sometimes I want to give up. However, each time I see Lily's photo on my bedside table, I am inspired to continue. I am gradually feeling a little better. This is the first positive update I've gotten in a long time, and my physicians are cautiously hopeful. Throughout the entire experience, my friends and co-workers were there for me. They did more for me than just raise money. In addition to dropping off meals and checking in frequently, they even assisted with house repairs when I was too ill to undertake them myself. I'm staying grounded because of their generosity. It's funny how unexpected individuals may come through for you in the most unexpected ways. I promised myself that I would shield Lily from all the unpleasantness. She is only a child. The specifics of what transpired between her mother and myself are not necessary for her to know. She shouldn't feel conflicted or puzzled. I'm trying to make our time together as enjoyable as normal as I can. I want her to view me as her father, rather than as ill. Although Ashley and I still need to talk about Lily, I just discuss her needs. I cut her off right away if she attempts to talk about anything else, like money, or her most recent sob tale. She seems to understand that I no longer have the energy for her games. Perhaps she came to her senses after losing in court. Or perhaps she's simply too ashamed to press on. In any case, she doesn't interfere with my affairs, and I'm content with that. Guys, guess what? My most recent round of chemotherapy recently ended. It seems unreal. Although I still have a long way to go, I feel hopeful knowing that I have overcome the most difficult obstacle. My prognosis is becoming better, according to my doctor, and I'm at last beginning to consider the future. Not only getting by, but truly living. In hindsight, the entire experience with Ashley revealed to me who was truly on my side and who wasn't. I learned to advocate for myself, even when I thought I had nothing more to offer. It also made me realize how much I have to fight for my friends, Lily, and my own stupid life. My friends, nobody can take away from the fact that I'm still here, still standing, and still moving forward. Not cancer. I can't be taken away from anyone. I appreciate you persevering till the finish. Good luck to me. Story 3. My Mom Threw Me Out is the title of this tale. Misappropriated my college funds and substituted my stepsister for me. She is now pleading with me to let her reside in the house. Grandpa left me this inheritance. Hello everyone. Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Have you ever noticed that your mother uses you as a stand-in for someone else? Yes, it is the beginning of this tale. I am Lily, a 23-year-old woman, and I considered my family to be typical until I was 13. I considered my dad, Ethan, to be a superhero. My mom, Fiona, is always there and always loved. She was more of a never-satisfied perfectionist, actually. Dad made growing up in a little 2-bedroom apartment seem lovely, so it didn't feel like a struggle. Weekends were spent creating forts in the living room, growing balconies, and making handmade pancakes. Fiona. She would linger in the background, generally murmuring that we needed a larger space or more funding. I didn't understand how little Fiona cared about our lives until my dad became ill. My dad attempted to brush it off when the doctor mentioned pancreatic cancer. He would say, "I'll be all right, kiddo." But his weary eyes told me the truth. He wasn't doing well. The man who used to lift me up and swing me about was hardly able to handle a coffee cup on the day of his death after months of suffering. Fiona collapsed. That's what she wanted everyone to believe anyhow. At home she checked out, but she sobbed a lot in public. I suppose I made her think of him too much. She ceased communicating with me. She stayed mostly confined to her room until it was absolutely essential. I'm not sure what I would have done if it weren't for Grandpa Henry. Grandpa wasn't only a substitute parent, he was everything. Like it was the most natural thing in the world, he took me in. I found refuge in his lovely old Victorian home. After weekends became weeks, I soon found myself residing there full-time. Grandpa never voiced any complaints, not once. He would only say with a smile, "Family was always supposed to fill this house." Fiona would occasionally contact me, primarily out of duty. The exchanges were brief and hurried, as if she were crossing things off a to-do list. She would inquire about school, pay little attention to my responses, and then quickly leave to attend to something else. I grew accustomed to the pain. My true family was now my grandfather. Then, without warning, Fiona arrived at Grandpa's house. A bright Saturday morning. She was radiant, sporting cosmetics and a bright yellow sundress as if she were going to a party. "Pack your luggage, Lily." She smiled as if she had won the jackpot and added, "You're coming home." I went cold. What? Why? As if it were the most commonplace thing in the world, she chirped, "We're starting fresh." Grandpa didn't say anything, but he appeared to be as perplexed as I was. I believe he wanted me to decide for myself, so I went. Perhaps Fiona has changed her ways, I thought. Perhaps she wished to mend our relationship. I was mistaken, boy. The moment we entered the apartment, a tall man and a girl, who appeared to be a few years younger than me, were standing in the living room. Fiona approached them almost dancing. "Meet Mia and Greg, Lily. They now belong to the family." Greg nodded and smiled sternly at me. Mia, however, had the arrogant appearance of someone who was already plotting how to ruin my life. "Hello." Feeling like a visitor in my own home, I mumbled. I was still standing there in disbelief, but Fiona pretended that this was some sort of major reunion and that we were all one big happy family now. Living with Greg, Mia, and Fiona, it was similar to playing a supporting role in someone else's family drama. However, I didn't apply for the position. It was obvious as soon as I arrived that this was no longer my home. The meaning of one big happy family was quickly understood. On the couch, Greg took Dad's place. Greg simply nodded in agreement with Fiona's requests as she pretended that Mia was the center of the universe. First, let's talk about the room scenario. I've left my former room. Within hours of my return, Mia had taken control. Fiona made no attempt to coax me into it. She just presented it on a silver platter to Mia. Mia requires privacy. When I objected, she said, "You're older. In the guest room you can get by," as though the conversation had ended there. The small guest room, a glorified closet, was where I was pushed. I hardly had room for a desk and a bed, not to mention clothing or books. It was immediately apparent that I was not a member of Fiona's ideal little family. I was only an idea after the fact. Mia quickly established herself in my room. She covered the closet with clothing I would never be able to buy, put boy band posters on the walls, and strung string lights. Even if I wanted to keep anything in there, she didn't ask. Every time I passed the door, it felt like a kick to the face. "Can I take some of my books off the shelf in there, Mia?" One day, I inquired. She gave me a look as if I had asked her to give me a kidney. "I suppose, but please don't damage my belongings." Her belongings? I had my books in my room, but it didn't seem to matter anymore. But it was more than the room. Fiona was so deeply partial that it seemed as though she had forgotten I was even there. Mia requested ballet instruction. Fiona made no hesitation at all. That same day, she took out her wallet and enrolled Mia in private lessons. I pleaded for dance lessons as a child. We couldn't afford it, Fiona had informed me. I brought this up, and Fiona waved me away. "Lily, Mia is incredibly talented. This is something she deserves, not to mention the telephone." My phone was an outdated, barely functional hand-me-down. Mia, meanwhile, grumbled that her phone was operating too slowly. Fiona went to buy her the latest iPhone as a result. "My phone is literally breaking, Mom. You'll get one night when it's needed," I said. Without even raising her eyes from her laptop, Fiona responded. The material things weren't the worst, though. The attention was the cause. Fiona acted like Mia was her only child. Every time I tried to talk to her, Mia would interrupt with some minor crisis, and Fiona would drop everything to help her. "Mom, can we talk about my college plans?" I asked one evening while she was cooking. Before she could answer, Mia waltzed into the kitchen. "Mom, I can't figure out this math homework," she whined, holding up a worksheet. Fiona immediately turned to her. "Oh, sweetie, let me help you." "But what about later, Lily?" Fiona said, brushing me off like I wasn't even there. Later never arrived. Mia was also the queen of passive hostile comments. She had this knack of making me feel tiny without outright stating anything. "Oh, I didn't know you were still wearing those shoes," she stated one day, staring at my worn footwear. "They're like vintage or something, right? Or my personal fave." "Oh, I thought you didn't care about having good stuff. That's like your mood." I tried to keep out of the way as much as possible. I spent most of my time in the little guest room or in the library, but even when I wasn't around, Mia found ways to make me feel uncomfortable. She'd leave her stuff all over the house, shoes in the hallway, textbooks on the sofa, hair ties in the bathroom, and then blame me when Fiona questioned about the mess. "Lily, can you tidy up after yourself?" Fiona stated one night, holding out a pink hairbrush. It was obviously Mia's. I said, "That's not mine." Fiona, however, was unwilling to listen. "Simply take it up. It's not really important." And it wasn't just Fiona. Greg did not fare much better. He pretended that Mia was a genius who was impervious to harm. Greg would always add his 2 cents whenever Fiona made a comment about how wonderful Mia was. At supper one evening, he said, "She's so dedicated, constantly learning and practicing ballet." Mia laughed as if she wasn't listening to all that was said. In the meantime, I sat quietly eating my spaghetti and pondered whether they even realized I was at the table. When Greg did speak to me, it was usually in a patronizing manner. "You ought to attempt to emulate Mia more, Lily." "Once," he said. "She's making great progress." I felt like screaming. I was putting a lot of effort into my studies, maintaining good marks, and making plans for college. But it didn't matter since I wasn't Mia. I made the decision to put back one day. You know, Mia doesn't have to be the center of everything. The table became quiet as I mentioned it over supper. Fiona gazed at me as if I had developed a second head. "That's inappropriate," she remarked in a voice. "Mia appears to be acclimating to a new family dynamic. You must be more encouraging. Helpful." She wanted me to be encouraging since I was barely surviving. At that moment, I realized that things would not improve. I was no longer considered Fiona's daughter. I served just as a hindrance and a reminder of a life she didn't desire. Conversely, Fiona believed that Mia was the ideal daughter, obedient, attractive, and eager to please Greg. He was willing to comply with whatever that pleased Fiona. I became less and less active at home. To escape being at that house, I would go on lengthy walks, hang out at the library, or stay late at school. I preferred to see as little of Fiona, Greg, and Mia as possible. However, I knew in my heart that I couldn't stay away from them forever. Commencement. I was unaware at the time that every battle would be altered by that encounter. I felt more and more like I was going to battle with Fiona as graduation drew near. Every time we had family dinners, she was all smiles and phony excitement, but I could see the tension rising. She seemed to be holding out for the perfect opportunity to blow me away. I had been secretly organizing my escape in the meantime, filing documents, applying for financial assistance, receiving acceptance letters, and sending college applications. I had no intention of letting Fiona or anybody else ruin this for me. My ticket out was Dad's education fund and I wasn't going to throw it away. I decided to give the news to Fiona after dinner one evening, in the hopes that she wouldn't be upset if I presented it as good news. Naturally, though, she discovered a cause. "Mom, I have some great news, Greg." I began speaking in a calm tone. "I was accepted to State University. For a moment, I'm going to study business management and finance." There was silence in the room. I had the hope that Fiona would surprise me and be pleased for me. Instead, she and Greg exchanged a gaze that made my stomach turn. "Lily, actually?" she answered, putting down her fork. "After some discussion, Greg and I have decided that it would be best for you to forego attending college at this time." I blinked. "What?" Greg cleared his throat as if he were going to make a major statement. "Lily, not everyone is cut out for college. We believe it would be more sensible for you to begin working as soon as you graduate. If you still want to go to school later, you can save up some cash." Despite my racing heart, I made an effort to remain composed. "I don't have to put money aside. That's why my dad left me a college money." Uncomfortable on her chair, Fiona moved. "Concerning that money." I went cold. "How about it? Mia has been doing quite well at school." Fiona spoke in a lovely voice, as if she were trying to persuade me that this was a good thing. "We believe it would be preferable to utilize the funds toward her schooling, because she has so much potential." What I was hearing was unbelievable. "Would you like to contribute Mia my college fund?" Greg said, sounding arrogant and pompous. "Lily? She's really skilled. It's the proper course of action. You ought to wish to stand by your sister." "Stepsister?" With a trembling voice I snapped. "And no, I'm not interested in giving her my money. The last thing my father left me was that fund. You cannot simply accept it." Fiona's expression became stern. "Quit being so self-centered. We are a family. Families share. Families are not robbed of one another." I fired back. "I own that money. The conversation is over." Fiona wasn't finished, though. "Maybe you don't belong here if you can't support this family," she said in a cold tone. I tightened my chest as I gazed at her. "Really? Are you throwing me out? Since I won't give you what's mine?" Fiona did not blink. "Yes. If you're going to behave in this manner, you're poisonous. Lily, that type of negativity is not necessary for our family." Like a small lapdog, Greg nodded along. Naturally, Mia simply sat there grinning. The expression on her face said louder than words could. She had already won, she knew. I stopped trying to argue. What was the purpose? Fiona had expressed her disinterest in me. Her golden kid, Mia, and her ideal small family were all that mattered to her. That evening, I packed my belongings, putting whatever I could in a few trash bags. Fiona was of no assistance. She didn't even visit my room to bid me farewell. As I dragged my belongings out to the curb, Greg remained hidden, presumably too afraid to face the consequences. Mia passed me with her phone. When she stated it, she didn't even glance up. "Goodbye, Lily. I hope you work things out." I felt like screaming at her, but why would I do that? I phoned Grandpa Henry instead. His voice was firm and comforting as he urged, "Come home, Lily. Here, you'll always be welcome." For the first time in years, it felt like breathing again when I moved back in with Grandpa. I didn't have constant tension. He did not inquire as to why I had left Fiona's place. "I'm proud of you for standing your ground," he remarked, and stopped there. The initial days were difficult. Thinking about Fiona, I kept playing back the fight, wondering if there was anything I could have said to help her understand. But I knew in my heart that there wasn't. Fiona had no desire to comprehend me. She had decided to choose Mia over me, and I couldn't have altered that with whatever I said. I poured myself into my college preparations with the intention of succeeding. If Fiona believed that without her, I would fail. A surprise was in store for her. From tuition payments to transferring into the dormitories, Grandpa helped me organize everything. Even on my first day, he gave me a motivational speech while driving me to university. As he assisted me in moving my belongings into my dorm, he remarked, "Your dad would be so proud of you." I only needed to hear that. It was years before I heard from Fiona again. No emails, texts, or phone calls. And that was a relief, to be honest. I didn't want her explanations or phony apologies. I had had enough of her and her poisonous relatives. College fulfilled all of my needs. Liberty. No more Fiona breathing down my neck, and a new beginning. I became pals. I worked part-time to keep myself occupied and excelled in my studies. My only ties to home were with Grandpa. He always found time to come see me on college throughout the holidays, and I contacted him every few days to keep up. "Lily, remember where you come from." He would remind me of my tenacity and that you had your dad's heart. Make good use of them. Greg, Mia, and Fiona, in the meanwhile. Silence on the radio. They faded into the past. Years passed with no calls or texts, which, to be honest, was perfectly acceptable to me. They obviously didn't care that I had shut them out of my life. I was glad to conclude a chapter in my life. Or so I believed. However, as they say, tranquility is temporary. I was unaware that Fiona was still plotting in the background. I and the things she believed she was entitled to were still on her mind. She also recognized an opportunity to seize what wasn't hers when her grandfather went away. However, her plan didn't work out this time. I received the call in the midst of my last semester. My phone buzzed as I was leaving my hostel after finishing a morning lesson. My stomach turned as I saw Fiona's name appear after years of nothing. I paused. The decline button has a thumb hovering over it. I was tempted to send it straight to voicemail, but my curiosity won out. "Hi there," I responded while already preparing myself. She read from a script, and her voice sounded flat. "Last night, your grandfather passed away. Thursday at 2 p.m. is the funeral time, at the Hartford Funeral Home." That was it. No sympathy, no warmth, no recognition of the heartbreaking nature of this news. She might have just as easily been directing me to the DMV. As the words set in, the phone fell out of my grasp. Grandpa had left. My rock, my refuge, my only remaining true family, lost. I was sitting on the floor crying onto my knees when my roommate discovered me. She made no inquiries, simply sat by me and listened to my tears. Thursday arrived far too quickly. I was wearing a black dress that felt suddenly too tight and scratchy when I got to the funeral home early. Since Grandpa wasn't around to put things right, everything felt off. It was all about Fiona, and I half expected her to arrive late wearing something gaudy. She didn't let us down, which was surprising. Around the middle of the service, Fiona entered via the open rear doors. Mia and Greg dressed as though they were trying out for a fashion display at a funeral. Fiona wore a sleek black dress, veil, and cap that matched. Greg seemed as though he had just walked out of a men's magazine, while Mia was dressed in a fashionable outfit. They didn't even recognize me, let alone sit with me. They chose to sit at the rear instead, as if they were VIPs attending a secret function. As if to gauge the amount of attention she was receiving, Fiona's gaze darted across the room, taking in every face. It was difficult for me to ignore them and concentrate on the service. My grief was exacerbated by the fact that the entire situation felt like a performance for Fiona. Desperate for some solace, I immediately went to my grandfather's house after the funeral. When I got into the driveway, however, I discovered something that made my blood boil. Garbage bags were strewn all over the front lawn. I initially believed that there might have been an accidental trash dump there. It wasn't garbage, though, as I approached. It was my belongings. The torn trash bags containing my books, photo albums, clothes, and mementos spilled out onto the grass. The small fragments of my existence that were treated like trash were my early memories. My key did not work when I tried it in the front door. Someone had replaced the lock. I stood trembling with anger and incredulity. As soon as the door opened, with a smug smile on her face, Fiona stood in the doorway, still dressed in her funeral gown. "Good, I see. You're here to gather your belongings," she remarked nonchalantly, like if she were helping me. "Now, this is my home. As his only child, I am the legitimate heir to my father's estate now that he has passed away." I looked at her and tried to think of anything to say. Even waiting until after the funeral was not an option. She gave a shrug. "Why prolong things? I have to make room for me. By the way, she's getting your former room. A larger bedroom has always been her dream." She was chilly. I was rendered speechless by calculated brutality. I didn't want to argue. I simply packed my car with as much of my possessions as I could manage. I sat in my dorm room that night, surrounded by trash bags, unable to process what had just transpired. I hadn't only been duped by Fiona. She treated Grandpa with the worst disdain. I considered contacting an attorney or taking some other action to defend myself, but I wasn't even sure where to begin. I felt helpless, like if Fiona had triumphed once more. However, a few days later, I received a call from Miss Lily, Grandpa's attorney. His voice was stern but calm as he spoke. "Regarding your grandfather's will, I'm phoning at 10 a.m. On Thursday, we will read it. Are you able to come?" I had no idea what to anticipate. What else could there be when Fiona had already claimed the house? I nonetheless consented to go. I wanted to hear what Grandpa had to say, if nothing else. When I arrived at the lawyer's office on Thursday morning, Fiona, Greg, and Mia were there. Fiona was already there, sitting in a leather chair and appearing to be the owner. "Why are you here?" Her tone was brimming with contempt as she questioned. "This doesn't require you. This is a family company." I sat down, ignoring her. What happened when Mr. Anderson, the lawyer, began reading the will really caught everyone in the room off guard. He started, "To my granddaughter, Lily. I leave behind the farms in Maple Valley, the lake cabin, my home at 1542 Oak Street, and all of my savings." There was silence in the room. Greg appeared to have eaten a lemon, and Fiona's smug smirk froze. "What?" Fiona screamed and grabbed the document out of Mr. Anderson's grasp. "That isn't feasible. His daughter is me." Calmly, Mr. Anderson took out the paper. "Mrs. Waters, the will is explicit. Lily was left everything by Mr. Henry." Fiona spluttered, her cheeks turning crimson red. "This is deception. She played tricks on him. I'll argue this." Mr. Anderson responded, unconcerned, "You can try." However, the will is unchangeable. Any challenge would be unsuccessful and expensive. Fake tears filled Fiona's eyes as she turned to face me. "Lily, my dear, please. To move into the house, we had to sell our flat. We have nowhere to go." I gazed at her, recalling every betrayal, every hurtful utterance, and every instance in which she had favored Mia above me. "It seems like an issue with you," I said, getting to my feet. "I was booted out once by you. I won't save you right now." I felt lighter than I had in years when I left that office. Grandpa's legacy was secure under my care, and Fiona's rule was finished. It felt strange to leave the lawyer's office with Grandpa's will. I kept hoping that someone would intervene, tell me that everything was an error, or that Fiona would come along and take it all. However, nobody did. Officially, it was. I owned the house, the lake cottage, the farm, the Maple Valley acreage, and Grandpa's savings. Following their brief outburst, Fiona, Greg, and Mia had rushed away. After Mr. Anderson assured them that the will was unchangeable, I assumed they would give up, but I obviously misjudged Fiona's entitlement. I went directly to the house the next day. My home. My chest tightened at the sight of it again, considering all of the times I spent there with my grandfather. However, their car was parked in front of me as I turned into the driveway. I murmured, "You must be fooling me." Fiona was indeed still present. She had settled into my house as if nothing had changed. I made no attempt to knock. I entered immediately. When I spotted them seated in the living room, my heart began to race. As if she owned the room, Fiona was drinking tea while relaxing on the couch. With her legs up on the coffee table, Mia was browsing through her phone as Greg was leafing through a magazine. "Why are you here?" With a stern voice, I said. Fiona looked up just a little. "This is my home," she remarked nonchalantly. "It's you who's encroaching." I held up the lawyer's documents. "It's actually my home. Remember how Grandpa left it to me?" She didn't even change her expression. "Will is making a mistake. I've begun the process of contesting it already." There was no comedy about it, yet I laughed. "Fiona, you can't argue with it. You've already heard from the lawyer that it's flawless." Greg frowned as he looked up at last. "Lily, we've already moved in. Where do you think we'll go? I have no problem with it." I fired back. "You lived in an apartment. Remember how you sold it?" "That's not what I told you to do." Fiona began to fake tears almost immediately. "Please, Lily, my dear, we are related. Grandpa would want that we remain together. Family." I raised an eyebrow and repeated. Her tears ceased as abruptly as they began. Her typical cold stare took its place. "We're not going anywhere," she stated firmly. I said, "Yes, you are. I'll call the cops for trespassing if you don't pack up and go by the end of the day." Before she could continue to dispute, I left. I could not possibly engage her in another argument over yelling. I conveyed the problem to a locksmith right away. In order to replace the locks, he consented to meet me at the home later that night. Fiona and her team were still there when I returned, and they had not packed at all. "It's time to go." Standing at the doorway, I said. With her hands on her hips, she rose to her feet. "Lily, this is crazy. Are you aware of how difficult it is to discover a new location quickly? Show some empathy." "Kindness?" I said with a sour laugh. "When you kicked me out, where was your compassion?" When Mia did speak, it was with a tone of entitlement. "All you're doing is being petty. All this room is not even necessary for you. In any case, what will you do with it?" I shot back because it's whatever I want. "Now leave!" After a great deal of whining, they eventually began packing. Fiona continued to grumble about how unjust everything was. Mia pretended to bang cabinets and drawers while Greg pouted. I watched from outside as they packed their car with luggage and trash bags. Like mine, it was uncannily pleasurable to see their possessions on the doorstep, just as they were wrapping up. Fiona gave me a final look. Her voice trembling with rage, she spat. "You're no daughter of mine. Your dad would be embarrassed by you." I steadied myself by taking a big breath. "No, Fiona. The fact that I finally advocated for myself would make my father pleased." I shut the door in her face as she opened her mouth to say anything else. The locksmith gave me the new keys after changing the locks. In the living room, I took a seat. The quiet was nearly overwhelming. Without Grandpa, the home felt empty. But I felt at ease for the first time in years. The days that followed were devoted to organizing and cleaning. Everywhere I looked, I saw small notes and reminders of my grandfather. A picture of him and his father from years ago. A book with his handwritten notes in the margins. The kitchen even has a container of his favorite tea. Even though it wasn't simple, I made the decision to go on in his honor. Thinking that the money would help me save for the future, I put the farmland and lake cabin up for rent. I wasn't yet prepared to make any significant decisions regarding the house. It was home for the moment. After that, Fiona made several attempts to reach me, but I didn't answer. I was aware that she wasn't expressing regret. All she wanted was something, most likely cash or lodging. However, I had had enough of her shenanigans. Grandpa's attorney, Mr. Anderson, wrote to me a few weeks later. A handwritten message from Grandpa, left just for me, was inside. "I'm leaving, Lily, if you're reading this. I know you'll be all right, but I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. You are free to utilize the home, the cabin, and the acreage any way you see appropriate. Just swear to me that you will not remove the family pictures from the attic. Even the unpleasant memories are worth preserving. Lily, you have my admiration. It has always been. It will always remain. Grandfather, Henry." I held the letter for a long time while I sat there, tears streaming down my face. Fiona had tried to take everything from me. My home, my future, my sense of self. But in the end, Grandpa had given me the tools to fight back. This wasn't just a win for me. It was a win for everything he and Dad had worked so hard to build. By the time I graduated, I'd had enough. There wasn't a big confrontation or any dramatic goodbye. I just stopped calling, stopped visiting. I threw myself into my work and focused on building a life for myself, free from their toxicity. And for a while, it worked. My business took off, and I finally felt like I was thriving. I didn't need Dad, Deborah, or even Lauren, which brings me back to that wedding invitation. Part of me wanted to toss it in the trash. Why should I go? Why should I care? They didn't care when I was struggling to make ends meet or when I needed a family. But something about that note gave me pause. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that tiny, stubborn flicker of hope that Lauren truly meant what she'd written. After a lot of back and forth in my mind, I decided to go. I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe to see if Lauren was sincere, maybe just to get closure. Either way, I told myself I'd show up, play nice, and leave if things got ugly. Simple, right? The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of conflicted emotions. I told myself over and over that I was doing this for Lauren, not for Dad or Deborah. Still, the thought of walking back into that environment, into the place where I was always the outsider, was enough to tie my stomach in knots. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. Memories from my childhood and teenage years kept flashing through my mind. Holidays where Lauren got showered with gifts while I got a token gesture. Dinners where Deborah's passive-aggressive comments made me feel about 2 inches tall, and Dad's indifference to all of it. It felt like no matter what I did, I was never good enough for them. They always found a way to make me feel small. By the time morning rolled around, I had barely slept, but I was determined. I put on my best suit, something tailored, sharp, and professional, and headed out. If I was going to face them, I was at least going to look like the success they always refused to see in me. The venue was stunning, I'll give them that. High ceilings, pristine floral arrangements, lighting that made everything glow just right. It was clear no expense had been spared. As I walked inside, I felt a mix of awe and bitterness. This wasn't just a wedding. This was a showcase, a grand spectacle to prove something. To who? I didn't know, but I could already tell it wasn't about love. Then I saw Lauren. She looked radiant, her smile wide as she greeted guests. For a moment, I forgot all the tension and resentment. When she spotted me, her face lit up, and she rushed over to give me a hug. "Evan, you came," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Of course," I replied, trying to match her energy. "Thanks for inviting me." For a moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, this was going to be okay. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Deborah. She was standing a few feet away, watching us. Her smile was plastered on, but it didn't reach her eyes. And then, as if on cue, she made her way over. "Evan," she said, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "You made it. Still running that little event business of yours?" I clenched my jaw but forced a smile. "I am. It's going really well, actually." She gave a smug little smirk. "That's nice." And with that, she turned and walked away. her mission to remind me of my place seemingly accomplished. Classic Deborah. I shook it off and found my seat. That's when the next slap in the face landed. The seating chart. I was at table 15, which in wedding hierarchy might as well have been in the parking lot. My table mates were a collection of distant relatives I barely remembered, and two strangers I'd never seen before. Meanwhile, Dad, Deborah, and Lauren's friends and in-laws were front and center, basking in the spotlight. I laughed to myself, low and bitter. Of course, even after all these years I was still an afterthought. Fine. I didn't come for the seating arrangements. I came for Lauren. Or so I kept telling myself. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I'll give them that. Lauren looked genuinely happy, and for a while, I let myself forget the tension. But as the reception began, the cracks started showing. I grabbed a drink and tried to make small talk with my table mates, but the conversations were forced and awkward. I could feel the stares from across the room, people who hadn't seen me in years whispering, probably wondering why I even bothered to show up. And then, the real storm hit. My dad approached my table, clearly several drinks in, his face flushed. I braced myself, knowing this wasn't going to end well. "What the hell are you doing here, Evan?" he slurred, slamming his hand on the table hard enough to make the silverware rattle. I stared at him, stunned. "I was invited," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Lauren asked me to come." He snorted, loud enough for half the room to hear. "You should have stayed where you belong. You're just here to embarrass us, aren't you? Pretending like your little party business means anything." The anger boiled up in my chest, but I swallowed it down. Before I could say anything, Deborah appeared at his side, her timing impeccable as always. "Evan," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "is that suit rented, or do you actually make enough to buy something like that?" Her smug little smile almost sent me over the edge. But instead of snapping, I did the only thing I could think of. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and said, "Excuse me." Without waiting for a response, I walked away. I didn't owe them a scene. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I stepped outside to the patio, needing air to clear my head. The cool evening breeze was a welcome contrast to the suffocating tension inside. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the garden. The twinkling lights strung through the trees should have been calming, but my mind was racing. The insults, the belittling. It was like a cruel time machine dragging me back to my teenage years. I could still hear Dad's words echoing in my head. "You're just here to embarrass us." How could they still see me that way? How could they act like I was some insignificant speck, especially after everything I'd accomplished? I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and told myself it didn't matter. I didn't need their validation. I'd built a successful business on my own, without their help. I didn't need their approval, and I certainly didn't need their respect. But it still stung. The sound of cheerful music drifting from the reception made it even worse. Inside, everyone was laughing, dancing, and enjoying the night, oblivious to the storm that was raging in my chest. I was just about ready to leave when something caught my attention. Through the glass doors, I saw the event staff bustling around the room. Something about their movement seemed oddly familiar. Their efficiency, the way they coordinated, it all felt like déjà vu. I frowned, watching more closely, and then it hit me like a bolt of lightning. These weren't just random staff members. They were my staff. My company had recently acquired a smaller event planning business, and I suddenly realized this wedding must have been one of their contracts. No wonder the setup was so polished. It was my team running the show. The realization was a strange mix of pride and irony. Lauren and Deborah had unknowingly, or maybe knowingly, hired my company to handle the most important day of their lives. Everything they were celebrating tonight, from the flowers to the lighting, was the result of my hard work. The power dynamics shifted in an instant. I pulled out my phone and dialed my operations manager, Kate. "Hey, quick question," I said, keeping my voice low. "This wedding at the Windsor Gardens, are we running it?" There was a pause, and then she said, "Yeah, why? Is something wrong?" I laughed, a dry, incredulous sound. "No, nothing's wrong. Just wanted to confirm." I hung up and stared back at the room, the weight of this realization settling in. Everything, the decor, the ambiance, the seamless flow of the evening. It was all because of my team. The very same team Deborah and Dad had just insulted me for leading. The irony was so thick it was almost comical. For the first time all night, I felt like I had the upper hand, but I didn't storm back inside to gloat or make a scene. That wasn't my style. Instead, I decided to take a different approach. I called Kate again. "Hey," I said, "can you pull up the contract for this wedding? Does it include the standard termination clause?" Yeah, she replied, sounding puzzled. "Why?" "Just checking," I said. "We're invoking it. Start packing up." There was a long pause. "Wait, what happened? Is everything okay?" I hesitated for a moment, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. "Let's just say the client made it clear they don't want me, or us, here. I'll explain later. Just trust me on this one." Kate didn't argue. "Got it, I'll handle it." I hung up, took one last deep breath, and walked back inside. I stayed in the shadows, watching as my team quietly began dismantling the decorations. They moved with the same precision they'd used to set everything up, their professionalism unwavering even as they packed away centerpieces and rolled up table linens. At first, no one noticed. That was a testament to how good my team was. But then, the whispers started. A few guests pointed to the lighting crew as they began removing uplights from the walls. The buzz in the room grew louder, confusion spreading like wildfire. And then came the inevitable. Deborah. She stormed across the room, her heels clicking like gunfire on the marble floor. Her face was a mask of fury as she confronted one of the servers, demanding to know what was going on. The poor server, clearly terrified, stammered something about talking to the event manager. That's when Deborah spotted Kate, who was calmly directing the staff. Deborah made a beeline for her, her voice rising with each step. "What is going on here?" she snapped. "Why are you taking everything down?" Kate didn't flinch. "We're following the terms of the contract, ma'am. Services are being terminated due to hostile behavior toward our management." Deborah blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "What hostile behavior? Who even is your management?" Kate didn't say a word. She just turned and gestured toward the patio, where I was standing. Deborah's eyes followed her hand, landing on me. Her expression darkened as realization dawned. I gave her a small wave, keeping my face neutral. She marched outside, her fury barely contained. "You!" she hissed. "You can't do this! This is Lauren's wedding!" "And this is my company," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "You made it very clear earlier that you don't respect me or what I do. So why would you want my services?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "You're doing this to punish me. To ruin Lauren's day." "This isn't about Lauren," I said, my tone icy. "This is about respect. You don't get to humiliate me and then expect me to provide top-tier service. That's not how this works." Before she could argue further, Kate appeared at my side, clipboard in hand. "We're all packed up," she said. "Ready to roll." "Perfect," I said, handing Deborah a card with my lawyer's contact information. "If you have any questions about the contract, feel free to reach out. Have a great evening." And with that, I walked away, leaving Deborah sputtering on the patio. I drove away from the venue with my heart pounding, the adrenaline still surging through my veins. As I watched the taillights of my team's trucks fade in my rearview mirror, a mix of emotions bubbled up: anger, satisfaction, even a little guilt. I didn't want to ruin Lauren's wedding, but this wasn't about her. It was about standing up for myself, for once refusing to let Dad and Deborah steamroll me like they always had. The drive home should have felt victorious. I'd just pulled off one of the most satisfying mic drops of my life. But instead, I felt conflicted. Had I done the right thing? Would Lauren ever understand why I did what I did? Those questions lingered in the back of my mind as I pulled into my driveway. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. By the time I'd changed out of my suit and sat down to unwind, my phone was already blowing up. Missed calls, voicemails, texts, They were all flooding in, one after the other. Most were from Deborah, as expected. Her messages were an incoherent mix of rage and entitlement, each one more dramatic than the last. "You ruined this family's reputation," one text screamed, every sentence ending with an exclamation point. "Do you even care what you've done to Lauren? You're a selfish, vindictive little boy who's jealous of everyone else's happiness." I muted her number after reading the first few messages. She wasn't worth my time or energy. Dad was next. His voicemails were less articulate, but just as hostile. There was a lot of slurring, a few threats to sue my ass, and even a laughable promise to call the cops. On what grounds? Breaching a contract they hadn't even bothered to read. Good luck with that. But it was Lauren's message that stopped me in my tracks. I'd been expecting anger from her, but when I finally opened her text, it wasn't venomous like Deborah's. Instead, it was filled with hurt. "Why would you do this to me?" she wrote. "I thought you came to support me. I didn't think you'd ruin my wedding." That one hit harder than I wanted to admit. Lauren wasn't like Deborah or Dad. Not entirely. She'd been caught in their orbit for so long, molded by their toxic behavior, that it was hard to separate who she really was from who they'd shaped her to be. I could hear the pain in her words, and for a moment, I considered calling her to explain. But I didn't. What would I even say? That her perfect wedding was ruined because her family had treated me like dirt one too many times? Somehow, I doubted she'd understand. The next morning, things escalated. Deborah, true to form, couldn't let it go. She must have been up all night spreading her version of events, because by noon, I was fielding texts and calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Most of them were asking for my side of the story, while a few outright accused me of sabotaging the wedding. I didn't have the energy to rehash everything over and over, so I sent out a blanket text to the handful of family members I still somewhat trusted. Long story short, I was insulted, disrespected, and treated like an outsider. Per the terms of our contract, I ended my company's services. If you have questions, ask Deborah. If you want the truth, ask the venue staff. I'm done defending myself. To my surprise, a few people actually sided with me. One of my aunts, who'd always been somewhat distant, texted back almost immediately. "Good for you," she wrote. "We saw how Deborah treated you at Thanksgiving 5 years ago. She's always been awful to you. I'm just sorry Lauren got caught in the middle." Her support was unexpected, but welcome. For years, I'd assumed the entire family had written me off, but this gave me a sliver of hope that maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Then came the silver lining I hadn't anticipated. By the afternoon, I started receiving emails, business inquiries to be specific. Apparently, word had spread among some of the wedding guests about what had happened, and a few of them were impressed by how professionally my team had handled the situation. One woman, a family friend of Lauren's in-laws, reached out to say she admired the grace and efficiency of my staff, despite the chaos. "I heard what happened," she wrote, "and I just wanted to say your team handled everything beautifully. I'm hosting a charity gala in a few months and would love to work with you if you're available." I almost laughed at the irony. The same wedding I'd been accused of ruining was now turning into free publicity for my business. By the end of the day, I had 3 more similar emails from other guests who were at the reception. It was surreal, but it felt like a small victory. Of course, Deborah wasn't finished. That evening, she took her tantrum online, leaving a scathing review on my company's page. She accused us of being unprofessional, unreliable, and ruining the most important day of her daughter's life. The review was full of outright lies, claiming we'd arrived late, provided subpar service, and abandoned the event without warning. Thankfully, I was prepared for this. I called my lawyer immediately, and within hours, a cease and desist letter was sent to Deborah, warning her that any further false statements would be treated as defamation. By the next day, the review was gone. That should have been the end of it, but this was Deborah we were talking about. The next morning, my lawyer called with news that would have been hilarious if it wasn't so absurd. "You're going to love this," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Lauren's family is threatening to sue you for breach of contract." I actually laughed out loud. "On what grounds?" I asked. "They're claiming you abandoned the event and caused irreparable damage to the wedding," she replied. "They're demanding a full refund and damages for emotional distress." It was so ridiculous that I didn't even know how to respond. Emotional distress? Because I enforced a clause they agreed to? The audacity was almost impressive. "Don't worry," my lawyer continued. "This is nothing more than a scare tactic. Their lawyer's letter is vague and full of holes. I'll draft a response, but trust me, they don't have a leg to stand on." As ridiculous as it was, I knew this legal back and forth was far from over. Deborah wasn't the type to back down without a fight. The threat of a lawsuit wasn't exactly shocking. This was Deborah, after all. If there was a way to escalate the situation and make herself the victim, she'd find it. True to form, her lawyer, a friend of Dad's from their weekly poker nights, sent a follow-up letter a few days later. It was just as absurd as the first, filled with inflated claims about financial damages and emotional distress. My decision to terminate services was painted as malicious and vindictive. My personal favorite line? "The abrupt removal of event decor caused irreparable harm to the social standing of the hosts." I couldn't stop laughing. Deborah had always been dramatic, but this was a whole new level of ridiculous. Fortunately, my lawyer wasn't amused. "They're throwing mud at the wall to see what sticks," she said during our next call. "They know they don't have a case, but they're hoping to intimidate you into settling." "What's the plan?" I asked, still incredulous that this was even happening. "We respond formally, lay out the facts, and remind them that pursuing this will be a waste of their time and money. Trust me, they'll fold. In the meantime, my team and I gathered everything we needed to shut their case down. The original contract was airtight, signed by Lauren herself, and the termination clause was clear as day. We also had witness statements from my staff, who'd heard Deborah's snide comments and seen Dad's drunken tirade. But the real nail in the coffin was the security footage. The venue had cameras in the reception hall and on the patio, and they'd captured everything. Dad stumbling over to my table, yelling at me about being an embarrassment, Deborah sneering about my little business, and even her meltdown when the decor started coming down. It was all there, in glorious high definition. When my lawyer sent the footage to Deborah's legal team, the case crumbled almost immediately. 2 days later, I got an email with the subject line, "Case dropped, no further action required." I stared at the screen for a moment, letting it sink in. It was over. I'd stood my ground, and they'd backed off. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd won. But the aftermath wasn't entirely smooth. A few days later, I got a call from Lauren's new husband, Adam. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey, Evan," he said, his tone awkward. "Look, I don't want to get in the middle of this, but Lauren's really upset. She feels like you blindsided her, and she's stuck between you and Deborah. It's tearing her up." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "I get it," I said. "But if Lauren wants to talk, it has to come from her. I'm not going to chase her down." "I'll tell her," he promised. She doesn't know how to start." "Thanks, Adam," I said, then ended the call. I didn't hold my breath. I knew Lauren, and I knew how deeply Deborah's influence ran. It would take more than an awkward phone call from her husband to fix years of damage. Still, part of me hoped. Maybe this could be the start of something different. A week later, I got a text from Lauren. "Can we meet up? I feel like we need to talk." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. On one hand, this was what I'd wanted, a chance to clear the air, to finally have an honest conversation. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the doubt. Was this an olive branch, or was she just trying to smooth things over for her own sake? Against my better judgment, I replied, "Sure. Let me know when and where." We agreed to meet at a small cafe, one I used to visit back when I was starting my business. It felt like neutral ground, a place where we could talk without the weight of the past crushing us. When I walked in, Lauren was already there, nursing a coffee and fidgeting with her phone. She looked up and smiled, a nervous, forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "Hey," I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. There was a long pause, the kind that makes you want to say something just to break the tension. But I waited, giving her the space to speak first. "I'm really sorry about everything that happened at the wedding," she finally said. "It got so out of hand, and I know Deborah and Dad said some things they shouldn't have." I raised an eyebrow. "Some things?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Okay, a lot of things, but you have to understand, weddings are stressful. Emotions were high. It wasn't personal." I let out a bitter laugh. "Not personal?" "Lauren, they called me an embarrassment. They mocked my business, belittled me in front of everyone, and basically told me I shouldn't have been there. How is that not personal?" She sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "Look, I'm not saying what they did was right, but pulling out like you did wasn't fair either. You ruined the reception. People are still talking about it." And there it was, the real reason she wanted to meet. This wasn't about what Dad and Deborah had done to me. It was about how my actions had inconvenienced her. "This isn't about what they did, is it?" I said, my tone icy. "This is about how it made you look." "That's not what I'm saying," she shot back, her voice defensive. "I just think you could have handled it differently. You didn't have to punish everyone because of what Dad and Deborah said." "Punish everyone?" I repeated, incredulous. "Lauren, they insulted me, the owner of the company they hired. They treated me like dirt in front of everyone, and you expected me to just stand there and take it?" "I expected you to think about someone other than yourself," she snapped. "It was my wedding, Evan. Do you know how humiliating it was when everything fell apart? People were asking what happened, and I didn't know what to say. I had to deal with the fallout while you just walked away." I stared at her, stunned. For a moment, I couldn't even find the words. "So that's what this is about," I said finally. "Not what they did, not how they treated me. It's about how it inconvenienced you." She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "I was trying to include you. I invited you because I wanted you there, and you turned it into a disaster." That sharp pang in my chest wasn't sadness. It was clarity. Lauren wasn't stuck between Deborah and Dad. She was just like them, entitled, manipulative, and unwilling to take responsibility for her actions. I stood up, tossing a few bills on the table to cover my coffee. "You know what, Lauren? I'm done. With you, with Dad, with Deborah. All of it. I've spent my whole life being the family scapegoat, and I'm not doing it anymore." Her eyes widened. "Evan, wait." "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to rewrite this. I came to your wedding because I thought things might have changed. But all I got was the same disrespect I've dealt with my whole life. I'm done, Lauren. For good." And with that, I walked out, leaving her sitting there in stunned silence. Walking out of that cafe felt final, like I was closing a door that had been cracked open for far too long. I didn't feel anger or sadness as much as relief. I'd said what I needed to say, and I wasn't looking back. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't tied to their toxicity. No more wondering what they thought of me, no more bending over backward to be part of a family that never treated me like one. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. That's not to say the fallout disappeared entirely. True to form, Deborah continued her smear campaign, though her tactics became increasingly desperate. After the failed lawsuit, she took to bad-mouthing me to anyone who would listen. Family, friends, even acquaintances. "You wouldn't believe what Evan did," she'd say. "He sabotaged Lauren's wedding out of pure spite. He's jealous, always has been. It's sad, really." But her efforts didn't have the impact she'd hoped. For one, most people already knew what kind of person Deborah was. And for another, I had the truth on my side. Anyone who reached out to me directly got the same straightforward response. The contract was terminated due to hostile behavior. If you'd like more details, feel free to ask the venue staff. Surprisingly, a few relatives came to my defense. My Aunt Margaret, who'd always been a quiet observer at family gatherings, called me one evening to share her thoughts. "I just want you to know," she said, Not everyone is buying Deborah's story. We've all seen how she treats you. You did what you had to do. It was a small comfort, but a meaningful one. For years, I'd assumed my entire family had written me off. Knowing there were even a few people who saw the truth made all the difference. On the professional front, things couldn't have been better. The chaos of Lauren's wedding inadvertently became one of the best things to happen to my business. The inquiries that started trickling in after the wedding turned into a steady stream of new clients. Apparently, word had spread among the guests about how gracefully my team had handled the situation, and they wanted that same professionalism for their events. One particularly lucrative opportunity came from a woman who was hosting a charity gala. "I heard what happened at the wedding," she said when we spoke on the phone, "and I was impressed by how you managed everything. I'd love for you to plan my event." By the time the gala rolled around, it was one of the most successful events we'd ever coordinated. That single opportunity opened doors to a new network of high-profile clients, and before long, my company was busier than ever. As for Lauren, she tried to reach out a few more times after our meeting at the cafe. Her texts were short and vague. "Hey, can we talk?" Or, "I really want to clear the air." But I never responded. What was there to say? She'd shown me who she was, and I believed her. Eventually, the messages stopped, and that chapter of my life finally felt closed. It was bittersweet, sure, but it was necessary. Family isn't about blood. It's about respect and mutual care, and none of them had ever given me that. I poured my energy into the life I'd built for myself, focusing on my business and the friendships I'd nurtured along the way. Those were the relationships that mattered, the ones that brought joy and support, not pain and judgment. Looking back, I don't regret a thing. Standing up for myself at Lauren's wedding wasn't easy, but it was the turning point I needed. It reminded me that I deserved better, that I didn't have to keep proving my worth to people who would never see it. Sometimes, walking away isn't a sign of weakness. It's a declaration of strength. And in doing so, I reclaimed my life. The family I left behind may still be stuck in their cycle of toxicity, but I've moved forward. And for the first time, I feel free.